There are some wounds that don't bleed. Some injuries that leave no bruises. Some pain that hides in silence, buried deep in the body, in the nervous system, in the breath we hold without even knowing it. And that's where this story begins. The Body Keeps the Score isn't just another book about trauma. It's not a textbook. It's not a self-help guide. It's a revelation. A call to remember that the body you live in, the one you walk around in every day, has been carrying your truth all along. Even when your mind forgot. Even when you tried to move on. Even when you said you were fine. Written by world-renowned psychiatrist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, this groundbreaking book dives deep into what trauma really is, not just an event that happened in your past, but a lasting imprint on your brain, your body, and your sense of self. Dr. van der Kolk spent decades working with war veterans, abuse survivors, and people whose lives had been shattered from the inside out. What he discovered: trauma doesn't just leave emotional scars. It changes how your brain works, how your body reacts, how you see the world, and how you see yourself. This book was first published in 2014, but its impact has been timeless. In a world that's finally beginning to talk about mental health and emotional wounds, The Body Keeps the Score feels more relevant today than ever before. Because today's world is traumatized, from pandemic grief to childhood wounds, from emotional neglect to complex PTSD. And most of us are walking around with stories trapped in our bodies that we haven't even begun to tell. But here's the hope: you can heal. This book gives you the science and the soul. It explains how trauma changes the brain, but it also shows you how yoga, movement, EMDR, neurofeedback, and even storytelling can help the brain and body find safety again. It's not about getting over it. It's about working through it. Gently. Slowly. Intentionally. With compassion. With patience. And with the understanding that you are not broken, you're wounded. And wounds can heal. So if you've ever wondered why you overreact to small things, why your body tenses without reason, why relationships feel so unsafe, or why your mind goes blank in moments of stress, this book is a mirror. And what it reflects back to you is powerful. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are surviving. This is not just a summary. This is a journey into the science of trauma, the strength of the human spirit, and the road to becoming whole again. Welcome to The Body Keeps the Score. Let's begin. Let's start from part 1, the rediscovery of trauma. Here I will cover this part chapter by chapter. Chapter 1, Lessons from Vietnam Veterans. Before trauma became a buzzword, before it was a trending hashtag or a topic of open conversation, it lived quietly in the shadows, in the broken lives, the haunted eyes, the things left unsaid. And that's where Dr. Bessel van der Kolk began. In the 1970s, he was a young psychiatrist working with Vietnam War veterans, men who had returned home from combat, but never really came home. They were physically present, yes. But emotionally? Psychologically? They were miles away. Distant. Disconnected. Trapped in a war that was long over, at least on the outside. These men weren't just struggling with bad memories. They were living inside those memories. They couldn't sleep. They had nightmares that jerked them awake, soaked in sweat. They drank too much. They pushed loved ones away. Some became violent. Others went completely numb. And worst of all, they felt ashamed. Ashamed that they couldn't just get over it. Ashamed that something inside them had shattered, and no one seemed to understand. Back then, trauma wasn't widely understood. PTSD wasn't even an official diagnosis yet. The medical world had labels for everything from depression to schizophrenia, but this was different. These men weren't crazy, they were injured. And those injuries were invisible, hidden in the wiring of the brain, in the body's response system, in the very core of their being. Dr. van der Kolk listened. That's where his genius began, not with pills or protocols, but with presence. He listened to these soldiers with open ears and an open heart. And what he realized changed the field of psychiatry forever. He began to see a pattern. A consistent set of reactions that connected trauma survivors, regardless of whether the trauma came from war, abuse, or neglect. These veterans experienced intense flashbacks, moments where it felt like they were right back in combat. But what struck Dr. van der Kolk the most wasn't just the memory, it was how the body reacted. The racing heart. The clenched fists. The frozen stare. It wasn't just in their head, it was all over their nervous system. He discovered that trauma isn't a story from the past. It's a current, living experience that gets trapped in the body. The trauma survivor doesn't remember the traumatic event as something that happened, but as something that is still happening. That's why loud noises can trigger panic. That's why touch can feel threatening. That's why the body reacts even when the mind doesn't understand. And slowly, the medical world began to wake up. PTSD became a recognized diagnosis in 1980, largely thanks to the advocacy of people like Dr. van der Kolk and other clinicians who believed what their patients were telling them. But even then, treatment was limited. Most doctors leaned heavily on medication, drugs to dull the nightmares, quiet the anxiety, take the edge off. But Dr. van der Kolk knew, trauma doesn't just need to be managed. It needs to be met, with curiosity and care. It needs to be felt in the body, named in the mind, and released with compassion. Because until it is, it stays trapped. And the body keeps the score. This first chapter is a doorway. It introduces us to the heart of the book's message, that trauma is not just psychological, but deeply biological. It lives in the brain, in the muscles, in the breath, in the gut. And if we want to heal it, we have to treat the whole person, not just the symptoms, not just the surface. Through these veterans, Dr. van der Kolk learned something radical, that healing from trauma requires more than medicine. It requires connection, safety, movement, and sometimes, a complete reimagining of what it means to be whole. And this is just the beginning. Next, Chapter 2, Revolutions in Understanding Mind and Brain. There's something wild about the human brain, something powerful, something fragile, and something we're only just beginning to understand. In Chapter 2, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk takes us deeper into that mysterious territory, into the very organ that stores our pain, our memories, our fears, and our healing. Back in the 1970s and 80s, psychiatry was at a crossroads. The field was shifting. On one side, you had traditional Freudian approaches, which looked at early childhood, unconscious drives, and long talks on the therapy couch. On the other, you had the rising wave of modern neuroscience, which asked, what if trauma isn't just emotional? What if it's chemical? Biological? What if trauma actually changes the structure of the brain? Dr. van der Kolk was one of the pioneers who stood at the intersection, a man deeply committed to the heart of human suffering, but also obsessed with understanding the mechanics behind it. And what he found was astonishing. When someone experiences trauma, especially intense, long-term, or repeated trauma, their brain doesn't just store a bad memory. It actually rewires itself to survive. The parts of the brain responsible for fear, stress, and survival, like the amygdala, become hyperactive. They're on high alert all the time. That's why a trauma survivor might flinch at loud noises or feel unsafe in seemingly safe places. Their brain is no longer scanning for reality, it's scanning for danger. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us think rationally, make decisions, and regulate emotions, starts to shut down. That's why it's so hard to just calm down, or snap out of it, when you're triggered. Your thinking brain isn't in control anymore. Your survival brain is behind the wheel. Even more heartbreaking? The Broca's area, the part of the brain responsible for language, often goes offline during traumatic flashbacks. That means people literally can't find the words to describe what they're going through. They feel it. Their body remembers. But they can't say it. And that silence? That's where shame grows. This discovery was revolutionary. It meant trauma wasn't just something you get over with positive thinking or willpower. It meant that trauma physically alters the brain. And if we want to help people heal, we can't just talk it out, we have to work with the brain, not against it. Dr. van der Kolk started using brain scans, imaging technology, and scientific studies to prove what trauma survivors had always known: something inside them had changed. And this wasn't just theory, it had real-world consequences. It explained why traditional talk therapy sometimes didn't help. Why medication might numb symptoms but not solve the root cause. Why people could know they're safe, but still feel like they were dying. The brain, after trauma, gets stuck in survival mode. And it doesn't come back to safety easily. It has to be retrained. Gently. Over time. Through connection, safety, and sometimes through the body itself. This chapter lays the scientific foundation for the rest of the book, showing us how trauma reshapes the brain, hijacks the nervous system, and changes how we experience life. But more importantly, it also points to something beautiful. If the brain can change because of trauma, then the brain can also change through healing. And that's the revolution. Not just understanding how trauma breaks us, but discovering how we can begin to put ourselves back together. Let's continue to Chapter 3, looking into the brain, the neuroscience of trauma? Imagine being able to peer inside someone's mind, not just to see what they're thinking, but to feel what they're feeling. To witness the exact moment when terror takes over. To watch how a single flashback, a memory, a sound, can light up the brain like a wildfire. That's exactly what Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and his team did. In this chapter, we go into the lab with him, where science meets humanity. Using cutting-edge technology like brain imaging scans, they watched what happened when trauma survivors were asked to recall their most painful memories. What they saw was chilling and deeply validating. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, lit up like a siren. It's the part responsible for fear, danger detection, and fight-or-flight responses. When a trauma memory is triggered, the amygdala doesn't say, "That happened back then." It screams, "This is happening right now." It sends signals to the body, "Get ready to fight. Get ready to run." But while the amygdala was going wild, something else happened, something just as important. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, calming down, and putting things in perspective, shut down. The part of the brain that lets you say, "I'm safe now, that was the past," just goes dark. It's like your logical brain steps out of the room, and your survival brain takes control of everything: your breath, your heart rate, your muscles, your emotions. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was what happened to the Broca's area, the brain's speech center. When trauma was triggered, Broca's area went silent. The survivor literally couldn't put their experience into words. And that's where so much of the misunderstanding happens in the real world. We ask people, "What's wrong?" We say, "Just tell me what happened." But their brain can't. Not because they don't want to, because it literally can't. The part that gives voice to the pain is paralyzed. And the silence becomes its own prison. But these findings weren't just about showing how trauma works. They were about finding the key to healing it. Because if trauma reshapes the brain, then healing must also involve reshaping the brain. Dr. van der Kolk began to understand that real trauma recovery doesn't come from simply talking about it. It comes from retraining the brain and nervous system to feel safe again. To calm the amygdala. To reawaken the prefrontal cortex. To bring language back online. To help the body and brain reconnect. And how do you do that? Sometimes through therapy, yes. But also through movement, breath, rhythm, connection. Sometimes through touch, music, art. Through experiences that help the body feel safe again. This chapter is the bridge. It connects the science with the soul. It proves that trauma isn't just emotional, it's neurological. It's physical. And it shows that healing must be more than just intellectual. It must be experiential. The body remembers. The brain remembers. And with the right support, both can recover. This is where trauma becomes not just a diagnosis, but a map. A map back to the self. Alright, now we step into the raw, primal truth of trauma with Chapter 4. This one takes us straight into the body's instinct to survive. It's not just about fear, it's about biology, ancient wiring, and how trauma hijacks the very system that's supposed to protect us. When danger strikes, your body doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait to hold a meeting. It reacts instantly, powerfully, and sometimes for the rest of your life. That's what this chapter is all about, survival. The ancient, automatic processes wired into every human being. The way your body responds when your brain senses, I might not make it through this. We're talking about the fight-flight-freeze response. These aren't metaphors. These are real, physical systems built into our nervous system over thousands of years of evolution. When a threat appears, whether it's a battlefield, a violent parent, or an emotional betrayal, your brain sends out a red alert. The amygdala flips the emergency switch, and everything else gets pushed aside. Your heart races. Blood rushes to your limbs. Your breath speeds up. Your vision narrows. Muscles tense. Also, you can either fight your way out or run like hell. But what happens when you can't do either? What if you're a child being abused by someone you depend on? What if you're a soldier pinned down in a war zone, paralyzed by fear? What if you're trapped in a car crash, or a hospital bed, or a home you can't escape? That's when something else kicks in, the freeze response. Your body shuts down. You go numb. Detached. Almost like you're floating outside your body. This is dissociation, the ultimate emergency response. When fight and flight aren't possible, the brain goes into shutdown mode. It's the body's way of surviving the unbearable. And here's the thing, that response doesn't just end when the danger does. That frozen energy, that unresolved survival instinct, gets trapped in the body. It's like a switch got flipped and never got turned off. Trauma survivors carry that unfinished response in their muscles, in their breath, in their heartbeat. That's why someone might start sweating or shaking during a seemingly normal moment. That's why certain smells, sounds, or situations can trigger full-body panic, even if the person knows they're safe. Because to the body, the danger never ended. This chapter also explores how trauma doesn't just affect the individual, it changes how they relate to everything. Relationships, touch, emotions, even time. When the body is stuck in survival mode, everything feels like a threat. People who want to love you feel dangerous. Situations that should be relaxing feel impossible. And joy feels foreign. Dr. van der Kolk explains that real healing has to go beyond talking. It has to involve helping the body complete that survival response, releasing the trapped energy, calming the nervous system, and teaching the body that it's finally safe. Sometimes that means movement, dance, yoga, martial arts. Sometimes it means breath work or sensory therapies. Sometimes it means simply learning how to feel again, without being overwhelmed. Because trauma isn't just something that happened, it's something your body remembers. And until that memory is met with compassion and regulation, the body keeps reliving it. This chapter is intense. It strips trauma down to its core, not as a weakness, not as a flaw, but as the body doing everything it could to survive something too much to bear. And it asks the question, what if healing isn't about forgetting the trauma, but about helping your body stop living in it? In part 2, this is your brain on trauma. We move from simply observing trauma to understanding how it shapes our everyday reality, our emotions, our decisions, our sense of safety, even our ability to feel love or joy. So here is Chapter 5, Body-Brain Connections. Close your eyes for a second and take a deep breath. Feel your chest rise. Your lungs expand. Your shoulders fall. That simple act? That's your brain and body talking to each other. Now imagine that after trauma, that communication line is damaged, or worse, completely shut down. That's what Chapter 5 is about, the fragile, powerful, life-shaping connection between your body and your brain, and how trauma breaks it. Dr. Van der Kolk starts this chapter by reminding us that the human body isn't just a vessel, it's a living, breathing communication system. Your gut feelings? Your racing heart? The chills on your skin? That's your body sending messages to your brain. It's your inner alarm system, constantly scanning the environment for signals of danger or safety. But here's the twist. When someone's been traumatized, their internal messaging system goes haywire. Instead of picking up on calm, grounded, peaceful cues, their nervous system is tuned into threat. All the time. Even when there is no threat. It's like trying to sleep next to a blaring fire alarm. The body sends out panic, and the brain believes it. The brain reacts not to reality, but to the body's fear signals. And so begins the vicious loop. You feel unsafe in your own skin. Your heart races for no reason. You can't trust your own emotions. You feel like you're overreacting, losing it, or worse, going crazy. But you're not. You're stuck in a body that's still fighting a war that's already over. Dr. van der Kolk describes how this disconnection leads to dissociation, a kind of out-of-body experience where survivors feel numb, shut down, or emotionally absent. They don't feel like themselves, or even like a person at all. And the worst part? Most trauma survivors don't even know this is happening. They just know that something feels wrong. But there's hope in this chapter too, real, grounded, scientific hope. The brain can be rewired. The body can learn to feel safe again. But not through words alone. Healing happens when we rebuild the bridge between the body and the brain, when we bring the two back into conversation. This is where modalities like yoga, EMDR, neurofeedback, and somatic therapies begin to enter the picture. These aren't just trendy tools. They're scientifically backed methods that literally help the body calm the nervous system and bring the prefrontal cortex back online. The goal isn't to think your way out of trauma. The goal is to feel safe in your body again. To breathe without panic. To exist without fear. To feel and stay present. Because the body, when listened to with compassion and care, becomes the path back home. This chapter is a powerful reminder that trauma lives not only in the mind, but in the muscles, the breath, the nervous system. And it offers the profound possibility that when we begin to feel safe in our own body again, we begin to reclaim our life. Next is chapter 6, Losing Your Body, Losing Yourself. Have you ever felt like you're floating outside your own body? Or like you're watching life happen from far away, like a movie you're not really part of? That's not just a feeling. That's dissociation. And in this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk explains exactly how it happens, and why it's the brain's last line of defense. When trauma is too intense, too overwhelming, or too inescapable, the body protects itself by shutting down. It disconnects. It numbs out. It says, if I can't fight, and I can't flee, I'll just disappear. People who've lived through severe trauma, especially from childhood, war, or abuse, often describe feeling like they're not fully present in their own lives. They go through the motions, but they don't feel anything. They smile when they should, laugh when expected, but inside, it's just blank. That blankness? That's survival mode. It's not weakness. It's not brokenness. It's the body saying, "This is how I kept you alive." But it comes at a cost. Because when you cut yourself off from pain, you also cut yourself off from joy, from intimacy, from love. You lose your connection to the world around you, and more heartbreakingly to yourself. Dr. van der Kolk shares stories of patients who couldn't recognize themselves in mirrors, who felt like their body wasn't theirs, who had no idea what they were feeling at any given moment. People who were physically alive, but emotionally exiled. And the tragedy? The world often doesn't see this kind of suffering. There's no blood, no bruises, no obvious wounds. But the damage is deep. The sense of isolation, of emptiness, of, "What's wrong with me?" It's devastating. But there's also a turning point in this chapter. A quiet, powerful one. Van der Kolk introduces the idea that healing starts not with thinking, but with feeling again. Reconnecting to your own body, gently, slowly, with compassion. Not rushing it. Not forcing it. Just noticing. A breath. A sensation. A heartbeat. A single moment of presence. He talks about therapies that help people safely re-enter their bodies, bodywork, yoga, theater, dance. Not to perform, but to feel, to move, to inhabit their own skin again. Because when you reconnect with your body, you begin to reclaim your identity. You begin to say, "This is my body. This is my life. And I'm allowed to live it." This chapter hits deep. It reminds us that trauma isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the silent absence of self, the quiet disconnection from the world. But it also reminds us that healing isn't a miracle. It's a process. A slow, steady return. And every time you breathe, every time you pause and feel, every time you stay present, even for a second, you take a step closer to coming back to yourself. You are not broken. You are healing. And your body, even after everything, is still on your side. Let's continue to Chapter 7, Getting on the Same Wavelength, Attachment and Attunement, where we explore how trauma affects our relationships, our ability to connect, and the longing we all carry to feel truly seen. We're wired for connection, from the very beginning. Long before we can walk or talk, we're already searching for one thing: safety in the eyes of another. A baby doesn't survive on food alone. It needs warmth, touch, presence. It needs to feel that someone is watching over it, responding to its cries, attuned to its feelings. That's not just emotional fluff, that's biology. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk explains how crucial those early bonds are. The way a caregiver looks at you, holds you, mirrors your emotions, it actually shapes how your brain and nervous system develop. If you're held with love, you learn the world is safe. If your emotions are welcomed, you learn you're allowed to feel. If you're seen, you learn you matter. But when those connections are broken, through neglect, abuse, or trauma, the impact is devastating. The nervous system doesn't learn safety. It learns alertness. It doesn't learn trust, it learns to anticipate danger, even in kindness. You start to believe, love isn't safe. Closeness is dangerous. I have to protect myself, even from the people I care about. And that belief doesn't stay in childhood. It follows people into adulthood, into their friendships, their marriages, their parenting. Trauma disrupts attunement, the ability to feel emotionally in sync with others. And when you lose that, you don't just feel alone. You feel invisible. Dr. Van der Kolk shares stories of patients who longed for connection but couldn't tolerate it. People who flinched when hugged. Who panicked when someone got too close emotionally. Who wanted love desperately, but also feared it. It's heartbreaking. Because the very thing that could heal them, connection, is the very thing they've learned to fear. But this chapter doesn't leave us in the dark. It also explores the path back. Healing begins with safe relationships. Whether it's a therapist, a partner, a friend, or even a group setting, healing happens when someone stays. When someone doesn't flinch at your pain. When someone mirrors your emotions with attunement. I see you. I feel you. I'm with you. That co-regulation, where someone else's calm helps your nervous system calm, is one of the most powerful healing forces in the world. The chapter also discusses the groundbreaking work of researchers like Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, showing how the vagus nerve plays a central role in social connection, safety, and trauma response. This science helps explain why we shut down, lash out, or freeze, and how we can learn to feel safe again, especially in the presence of others. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship, in safety, in rhythm, in the quiet, wordless moments when someone stays with you, no matter what. This chapter is a powerful reminder that we're not meant to do life alone. That healing isn't just about techniques or therapies, it's about being seen. And that with the right attunement, the right presence, even the most wounded nervous system can begin to rest and trust again. Let's keep moving forward. Chapter 8 delves into the deepest, most heartbreaking aspects of trauma. The kind that happens when relationships, the very ones we need for survival, turn into the source of harm. It's about the impact of abuse and neglect, the cost of living in a state of constant threat. This chapter isn't easy to digest, but it's necessary. It gives us the language to understand how these kinds of experiences impact a person's sense of self, trust, and ability to connect. It shows us the lasting damage trauma leaves behind. This is Chapter 8, Trapped in Relationships, the Cost of Abuse and Neglect. There's a quiet horror in this chapter. It's not loud. It's not violent. It's the kind of horror that seeps into the soul, that shifts the way you see yourself and the world forever. Abuse doesn't always come in the form of bruises. Neglect doesn't always look like abandonment. These wounds can be silent, subtle, but devastating in their impact. They slowly erode the sense of safety that's supposed to be built through love and attachment. And when this happens, it leaves a person isolated, lost, and unable to trust anyone, including themselves. Dr. Van der Kolk shares stories of patients whose most formative relationships, parents, caregivers, partners, were the very ones that caused the most damage. Sometimes it's the subtle emotional neglect, the absence of love, the coldness of a parent's gaze, the feeling of being invisible. Sometimes it's the louder, more overt forms of abuse, violence, manipulation, betrayal. What's truly heartbreaking is that these early experiences of betrayal and pain don't just fade away with time. They form the foundation for how someone sees themselves. When you're mistreated as a child, or made to feel worthless, that imprint doesn't just vanish with age. Instead, it often grows into a pervasive sense of shame. The person internalizes the message. I am unworthy of love. I am broken. I am the problem. Van der Kolk emphasizes how these deeply embedded beliefs shape every aspect of a person's life, how they interact with others, how they experience intimacy, how they relate to themselves. Even as adults, these survivors might feel trapped in their relationships. They might enter partnerships that mirror their traumatic pasts, feeling both the longing for love, but also the deep fear that love will hurt them. They might struggle to trust. They might feel disconnected, even when surrounded by people who care about them. The worst part? It can be difficult to even recognize this pattern. Trauma survivors often go through life not knowing why they feel so distant from others, so emotionally paralyzed, so stuck. It feels like the world is too big, too overwhelming, and nothing ever quite fits. But Van der Kolk doesn't just leave us with a feeling of despair. He offers hope. The healing process begins when we start to recognize these patterns. When we understand that trauma isn't something wrong with us, it's something that happened to us. And by seeing it, we can start to untangle the beliefs and fears that trap us. Healing comes from a new kind of relationship. One where safety, trust, and consistency are prioritized. Where people can begin to relearn what healthy attachment looks like. Whether it's through therapy, creating safe boundaries, or entering nurturing, compassionate relationships, healing is about finding people who will show you that love doesn't always come with strings attached. That it doesn't have to be painful. This chapter also focuses on the importance of self-compassion. For trauma survivors, especially those affected by abuse and neglect, learning to show kindness to themselves is one of the first steps toward breaking the cycle of shame. Abuse, neglect, and trauma don't just leave scars on the body. They leave marks on the soul. But the good news is, these marks can fade. With time, support, and self-compassion, we can break free from the chains of our past and learn to trust ourselves again. Let's dive straight into Part 3. The Minds of Trauma Survivors. Here, Dr. Van der Kolk takes us into the heart of one of the most fundamental human needs, love. Trauma affects every part of our lives, but perhaps nothing is more deeply impacted than our ability to love and be loved. This chapter focuses on the intricacies of trauma's effects on relationships, and how we can begin to rebuild our capacity for deep, meaningful connection. Chapter 9 is, What's Love Got to Do with It? Love. It's one of the most beautiful, powerful forces in the human experience. But for trauma survivors, love can also feel like a battlefield. The very thing they crave the most, intimacy, connection, acceptance, is often the thing that feels the most dangerous. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk explains that trauma doesn't just hurt the individual, it hijacks their ability to form healthy, trusting relationships. It distorts the way we see intimacy and connection, turning love into something we either fear or avoid. Have you ever felt like you wanted to love someone, but couldn't fully open up? Or maybe you found yourself pushing others away, afraid of getting too close, even when deep down, you long for that closeness? That's trauma at work. Dr. van der Kolk highlights the incredible complexity of trauma's effect on love and attachment. It's not just about trust, it's about how our brain and nervous system interpret intimacy. When you've experienced abuse, neglect, or betrayal, your brain doesn't just learn to fear danger in the world. It learns to fear closeness, even when there's no threat. When trauma is stored in the body, it sends a signal to the brain. Don't get too close. Don't trust. Keep your guard up. As a result, trauma survivors often struggle with deep emotional disconnection, both from themselves and others. But this chapter is not just about the pain of disconnection. It's about the possibility of reconnecting. Dr. Van der Kolk takes us through real-life stories of patients who've been able to break through the walls of emotional numbness and learn how to form authentic, trusting relationships again. But it doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, consistency, and most importantly, the willingness to feel vulnerable again. He emphasizes that trauma survivors can heal their capacity for love by practicing emotional regulation, learning to stay grounded in moments of intense emotional overwhelm. Through therapies like mindfulness and somatic work, individuals can retrain their nervous system to tolerate emotional closeness without feeling overwhelmed. Healing also involves redefining what love means. Van der Kolk talks about how trauma survivors often have to relearn that love isn't about control, power, or emotional distance. It's about mutuality. It's about feeling safe enough to give and receive love without fear, without manipulation, without the need for validation through suffering. This chapter invites us to ask ourselves, what does love really mean? What does it feel like when we can trust ourselves enough to trust others? When we can open our hearts without the constant fear of being hurt? As tough as it is to hear, the chapter doesn't sugarcoat things. It makes it clear, if you've been hurt by love, the only way to heal it is to experience love again, but in a new, safe, and supportive way. It's about learning to be present with others and with yourself. Healing love takes time. It takes practice. But it's possible. Van der Kolk ends the chapter with a powerful insight. Trauma doesn't have to destroy your ability to love. In fact, it can become the very thing that helps you learn to love deeper, not just others, but yourself too. Chapter 10. The Power of the Body. In the world of trauma recovery, there's an idea that might sound radical at first. That the body is just as, if not more, important than the mind in the healing process. It's something that many people don't understand when they think about trauma. We often think of trauma as something that exists in the head, as something that only affects our thoughts, our memories, our emotions. But Dr. van der Kolk takes us deeper, showing us that trauma lives in the body too. Think about it. Have you ever felt tension in your shoulders after a stressful day? Or a tightness in your chest when you're anxious? Maybe you've had a sudden flashback or a panic attack, and your body immediately responds, even though the threat is long gone. That's the power of the body. It remembers the trauma. Dr. van der Kolk shares fascinating insights from his work with patients who've experienced deep trauma. Many of them couldn't just talk about their pain. They couldn't express it through words alone, but through somatic therapies. Working with the body through movement, touch, and mindfulness, they began to reconnect with their emotions in a way that words couldn't reach. The brain and body are deeply interconnected. What happens in one often happens in the other. When trauma disrupts the body, it also disrupts the mind, and vice versa. But when we start to focus on the body, on what we feel, where we feel it, and how we hold our experiences within ourselves, we start to open the door to healing. This is where techniques like yoga, breath work, and bodywork come into play. These aren't just relaxation techniques. They're crucial tools for reprogramming the nervous system and helping it process trauma in a safe way. By focusing on how the body feels, rather than just thinking our way through the trauma, we begin to reclaim control over our responses. Dr. van der Kolk also discusses the therapeutic potential of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. A powerful approach that uses bilateral stimulation, typically eye movements, to help the brain process trauma. This, alongside practices like neurofeedback, shows just how much science is now catching up with what people have intuitively known for centuries. The body has the answers. Van der Kolk doesn't shy away from the hard truths here. He explains that simply talking about trauma isn't always enough. For those whose trauma is deeply embedded in their body, they need physical techniques to release those trapped emotions. And it's not just about healing the past, it's also about creating new patterns. Relearning what it feels like to feel safe in your body. And from there, rebuilding a sense of empowerment and control over your own life. One of the most poignant sections of this chapter is when van der Kolk shares how trauma survivors can start to reclaim their bodies by relearning to listen to them. It's not about pushing yourself to be strong or ignoring the pain. It's about honoring the signals your body is giving you and learning how to respond with compassion and care. Through body-focused practices, you start to realize that the body isn't the enemy. It's the key to recovery. It's not just a vessel that houses your pain. It's the vehicle through which you can heal. Healing is not only a mental or emotional process. It's a whole-body experience. Your body can help you release trauma. It can help you process the emotions you've been holding onto. And in doing so, it can help you live your life again, in the fullest, most present, most alive way possible. Next is Chapter 11, Uncovering the Truth. This chapter is powerful, because it's not just about understanding trauma. It's about healing it, and moving forward. Trauma survivors often live with a deep sense of disconnection, from themselves, from others, and even from their own life story. They feel like their past defines them, but they don't have control over that past anymore. But the truth is, trauma doesn't have to be the narrative that defines you forever. Dr. van der Kolk talks about how healing trauma involves uncovering the truth about what happened, but also about who you are now. So many trauma survivors live in a state of dissociation, where they're disconnected from their own body, their emotions, and their experiences. In essence, they become disconnected from their own story. In this chapter, we see how reclaiming your story can be one of the most important steps toward healing. Dr. Van der Kolk explains that when people go through traumatic events, they often get stuck in the pain and shame of what happened. This leads to a fragmented, incomplete sense of self. They may find it difficult to remember what happened to them, or their memories may feel like they're out of sequence, blurry, or even completely suppressed. In a way, trauma disconnects us from our own narrative. But healing, according to van der Kolk, is about bringing all of these fragmented pieces of the story back into focus. It's about finding the courage to tell the truth of your experience, even the hardest parts. Only then can the healing truly begin. One of the most important aspects of uncovering the truth is the process of reintegrating memory. Trauma often distorts memory, making it difficult for survivors to process their experience in a coherent way. People who have experienced trauma may have flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive thoughts that cause them to relive the events. But these aren't just memories. They are fragments of what happened, disconnected from the full story. The process of healing involves integrating these fragments into a cohesive narrative. Dr. van der Kolk shares stories of his patients who, through therapy and other trauma-focused approaches, begin to reconnect with their past in a way that's not paralyzing. They can start to see the bigger picture, how they survived, how they grew, and how they overcame obstacles. It's about moving from a place of helplessness to a place of empowerment. This is where you start to reclaim your sense of control over your life. A critical element of this process is creating a coherent narrative. When we can make sense of our past, without minimizing the pain or hiding from it, we begin to understand how our past shapes the present. The key is not to stay stuck in that pain, but to find the strength to move forward, armed with the knowledge of who we are, what we've been through, and how we've survived. Dr. van der Kolk also talks about the role of social support in this process. The truth is, uncovering trauma is not something you should do alone. It requires the support of safe, compassionate people, whether they're therapists, support groups, or loved ones. Rewriting your story can be difficult, but with the right support system, it becomes a little less daunting. At the heart of this chapter is the idea that healing is an active process. It's not just about surviving the trauma, it's about taking back the power that trauma once held over you. It's about saying, "This is my story, and I choose how it ends." The chapter reminds us that trauma survivors can find meaning and purpose again. They can reclaim their power, their sense of agency, and their ability to make choices. One of the most inspiring moments of this chapter is when Dr. van der Kolk talks about the healing power of telling your story. He emphasizes how telling your story, in your own words, in a safe environment, helps you process the emotions tied to the trauma. It's a way of reclaiming ownership over your life, moving from the darkness of the past into a more empowered present. Next is Chapter 12, The Unbearable Heaviness of Remembering. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk focuses on the profound challenge trauma survivors face when they try to remember their traumatic experiences. For many, trauma memories don't come back in a clear, ordered sequence. Instead, they can feel fragmented, disjointed, or overwhelming. These memories often resurface in a way that feels like they are happening right now, not as past events. This phenomenon can make trauma survivors feel as though they are reliving the pain rather than processing it in a healthy way. One of the reasons this happens is because trauma can disrupt the brain's natural process of storing memories. Under ordinary circumstances, the brain stores memories in an organized way, allowing us to reflect on the past without being overtaken by it. But in the case of trauma, these memories often become stuck in the emotional brain, which is why survivors can experience flashbacks, vivid images, or overwhelming emotional reactions when something triggers the memory. Dr. van der Kolk explains that these memories can often feel like a heavy burden that survivors carry with them. The memories don't just live in the mind, they often invade the body as well, leaving trauma survivors with physical sensations of fear, anxiety, or even numbness. It's a deep emotional and physical weight that becomes a constant part of the person's experience. What makes this chapter particularly powerful is that Dr. van der Kolk emphasizes that healing begins when survivors find a way to process these fragmented memories. He talks about how, without the right support and therapeutic interventions, trauma survivors can feel trapped in this heavy remembering, which keeps them from truly healing. Therapies like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, have shown to be highly effective in helping trauma survivors integrate these fragmented memories and make sense of their experiences. These therapies help the brain process trauma in a way that allows the memories to be remembered in their proper context, as past events that no longer have to control the present. The chapter also discusses how the process of reprocessing memories is crucial for emotional healing. When trauma survivors can move from surviving the memory of trauma to understanding it, they begin to regain control over their story. This is where true healing starts. When you stop feeling like a passive victim to your memories and become an active participant in your healing process. Dr. van der Kolk stresses the importance of creating a safe space for survivors to remember in a way that feels manageable. Whether through therapeutic interventions or by writing their stories down, survivors must have the opportunity to reflect on what happened without being overwhelmed by it. This allows them to reconnect with their memories in a way that feels empowering, not paralyzing. He concludes the chapter by reminding us that trauma survivors often carry the belief that their memories are too painful to face. But with the right tools and support, survivors can transform how they experience those memories, and in doing so, transform how they experience their lives. Let's dive into Part 4. The Imprint of Trauma. Now, Chapter 13. Healing from Trauma, Owning Yourself. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk discusses one of the most empowering aspects of trauma recovery, the journey of regaining control over your own life. After experiencing trauma, many people feel as if they've lost themselves, lost their sense of autonomy, control, and safety. The events of trauma often create a disconnection between the survivor and their own body, mind, and spirit, leaving them feeling as though they no longer own themselves. This chapter offers hope by showing how trauma survivors can take ownership of their lives again. Dr. van der Kolk explains that trauma creates a rift between the survivor's true self and the person they become after the traumatic event. They may feel as though their identity has been permanently altered, and they may struggle with feelings of helplessness, shame, or powerlessness. This loss of control is one of the most difficult aspects of trauma, but the process of healing begins when survivors begin to reclaim that control. One of the most powerful ways to regain ownership of oneself is through self-awareness. Dr. van der Kolk emphasizes the importance of survivors reconnecting with their emotions, their thoughts, and their bodies. Often, trauma survivors experience emotional numbing, where they shut down their feelings in an attempt to avoid the pain. However, in doing so, they also numb the joy and vitality of life. To own yourself, again, means to start feeling all of your emotions, not just the painful ones, but the full range of human experience. This doesn't mean reliving the trauma over and over, but rather feeling emotions fully and expressing them in healthy ways. Dr. van der Kolk discusses how mindfulness, expressive writing, and art can help survivors reconnect with their emotional selves in a safe, manageable way. By allowing themselves to feel, survivors take the first step toward reclaiming their agency. Another key part of this healing journey is setting boundaries. Trauma often leaves survivors with a skewed sense of self-worth, making them feel that they don't have the right to set boundaries. But Dr. van der Kolk emphasizes that boundaries are essential for healing. Setting boundaries, whether with other people or with oneself, is an act of reclaiming power. When survivors can say no to what doesn't serve them, they affirm that they are worthy of respect and care. This simple act of asserting boundaries is a crucial step in owning one's life again. Dr. van der Kolk also talks about how survivors must reconnect with their sense of purpose. Trauma can strip away a person's sense of meaning, leaving them feeling adrift. Part of owning yourself again is discovering or rediscovering what gives your life meaning. For some, it might be creativity; for others, relationships, spirituality, or meaningful work. Reclaiming purpose helps survivors move from a place of survival to one of thriving. Another aspect of healing is reconnecting with the body. Trauma often creates a disconnection between the mind and the body, as survivors try to distance themselves from the physical sensations associated with trauma. To truly own yourself, survivors need to rebuild that connection. Dr. van der Kolk highlights that therapies like yoga and somatic experiencing can help survivors reintegrate their bodies in a safe, loving way. These practices can help break the pattern of emotional numbness and hyperarousal that trauma survivors experience, allowing them to feel comfortable and grounded in their own skin again. Perhaps one of the most critical themes in this chapter is the idea of self-compassion. Trauma survivors are often their own harshest critics, believing that they should have done something differently or that they are somehow to blame for what happened. Dr. van der Kolk stresses the importance of treating oneself with kindness and patience, especially in the healing process. Self-compassion is not about excusing harmful behavior, but about recognizing that healing takes time and effort, and that survivors deserve love, understanding, and care as they heal. Lastly, Dr. van der Kolk emphasizes that healing is not a linear process. Owning yourself again means accepting that there will be setbacks, difficult moments, and challenges along the way. But that's part of the journey. The important thing is that survivors continue to move forward, no matter how slow or difficult the process may be. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk reminds survivors that they have the power to reclaim their lives and rebuild a sense of control. Healing trauma is not about erasing the past, but about finding a way to live fully in the present and future, despite that past. It's about reconnecting with your body, emotions, and sense of purpose, and creating boundaries that protect your well-being. Next is Chapter 14, Language, Miracle and Tyranny. In this deeply insightful chapter, Dr. van der Kolk begins by explaining a powerful truth. Trauma doesn't just silence us in the moment. It can take away our words long after the event has passed. Survivors often struggle to describe what happened to them. It's not just that they can't find the right words, sometimes the words don't exist. Or they exist only as sensations, flashes, or feelings that feel stuck in the body with no voice. This is one of the cruelties of trauma. When something horrific or overwhelming happens, the brain often shuts down the part that handles language, specifically, Broca's area. That's the region responsible for putting thoughts and feelings into words. In trauma, that area can go offline, and survivors can be left unable to explain, describe, or even fully comprehend what happened. They might say, "I don't know, I can't talk about it," or, "It's just a blur." And that's not avoidance, it's neurological. But here's the miracle part. Language can also be a path to healing. Dr. van der Kolk explains that putting words to your experience is a powerful act of reclaiming control. When survivors find the language to express their pain, whether through speaking, writing, art, or movement, they start to gain distance from the trauma. They can begin to observe it, understand it, and relate to it, rather than be consumed by it. He introduces us to a compelling idea: narrative memory versus traumatic memory. Traumatic memory is stored in fragments, images, sensations, emotions, often disconnected from time or logic. It lives in the body and resurfaces without warning. But narrative memory, memory that has been given shape and structure through language, can be integrated into our life story. That's the goal of healing, not to erase the trauma, but to transform it into something that no longer controls you. One of the most effective tools for this, he explains, is writing. Expressive writing. Even for just 15 minutes a day, can help trauma survivors begin to process their experiences. Not in a way that overwhelms them, but in small, manageable pieces. Dr. van der Kolk refers to research by psychologist James Pennebaker that shows how writing about emotional upheaval, even briefly, can result in physical and emotional benefits, like improved immune function and better mental clarity. However, not all language is helpful. Dr. van der Kolk warns about the tyranny of language, where survivors are forced to label their experiences too soon or told what they should feel. This can backfire, especially when well-meaning therapists, family, or society try to impose interpretations on someone's pain before they're ready. Healing requires ownership of one's story, not just repeating someone else's script. The chapter also explores the power of metaphor and imagery in expressing trauma. Survivors often describe their experience using metaphors like a fog, a wall, or a volcano inside me. These expressions may not be clinical, but they are authentic, and often closer to the truth of how trauma feels than dry diagnoses or textbook terms. Allowing people to describe their pain in their own language is key to restoring agency and voice. Dr. van der Kolk also touches on therapies that go beyond verbal communication, like art therapy, music, theater, and body-based therapies, because some experiences live in the nonverbal parts of the brain. In those cases, language may not come first, but can follow after the emotions and memories have been safely expressed through movement or image. What this chapter beautifully teaches us is that language is both fragile and powerful. It can fail us in the worst moments, but it can also bring us back to ourselves. Learning to speak, not just in words, but in truths, in feelings, in whatever language the body or the heart chooses, is a crucial part of reclaiming life after trauma. Next is Chapter 15, Letting Go of the Past. This chapter is where the science of trauma meets the human longing for freedom. Letting go of the past isn't about forgetting, pretending it didn't happen, or sweeping pain under the rug. It's about no longer allowing the past to have power over your present. It's about finding a way to live again, fully, openly, and without being trapped in a cycle of fear and defense. Dr. van der Kolk begins this chapter by explaining that trauma creates a biological imprint, a living memory that is stored not just in the mind but in the body itself. That's why talk therapy alone often isn't enough. Trauma survivors may understand what happened to them on a logical level, but their bodies still react as if the danger is happening right now. The past hijacks the nervous system. Heart rates spike, muscles tense, and the world feels unsafe, even when nothing is wrong. This is why letting go is so much more than a mental decision. It's a full-body process. It's about helping the brain and body learn that the trauma is over, that it's safe now, and you don't have to stay locked in survival mode. One of the most powerful tools Dr. van der Kolk introduces in this chapter is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It might sound strange at first, but it's an evidence-based therapy that's helped thousands of trauma survivors. Here's how it works. While the patient recalls a traumatic memory, they follow the therapist's finger or a moving light back and forth with their eyes. This movement mimics the natural processing that happens during REM sleep, and for reasons still being studied, it helps the brain reprocess traumatic memories in a way that feels safer and less threatening. The result? Those memories lose their emotional grip. They no longer feel like they're happening in the present. Survivors can remember them without being overwhelmed or re-traumatized. EMDR helps the brain recognize, this was then. This is now. Dr. van der Kolk shares powerful case studies of people who had carried their trauma for decades, abuse, accidents, loss, and how EMDR allowed them to release the pain, sometimes in just a few sessions. Not because it erased what happened, but because it changed their relationship to it. They were no longer at the mercy of their past. But EMDR isn't the only way to let go. The chapter also explores theater and role-play as tools for trauma recovery. For centuries, human beings have used storytelling and performance to make sense of life. And for trauma survivors, stepping into a role, even temporarily, can be profoundly healing. It allows them to experiment with new identities, express buried emotions, and create meaning from their suffering. Dr. van der Kolk shares examples of working with at-risk youth and veterans using theater as a tool for healing. When people feel seen, when they can express rage, grief, or fear safely and creatively, they begin to reclaim their story. No longer just victims or survivors, they become authors, performers, witnesses to their own strength. And through all of this, one theme remains constant: connection. No one heals in isolation. Letting go of the past happens in the presence of trust, safety, and relationship. Whether it's a therapist, a group, a friend, or a supportive community, healing happens when people feel seen, heard, and believed. The isolation trauma creates begins to dissolve the moment someone reaches out and says, "I'm with you. You're not alone." This chapter also honors that healing is not a straight path. There are moments of release and then moments when the pain resurfaces. That doesn't mean failure. It means you're still alive, still growing, still doing the work. Letting go of the past isn't a single act. It's a practice. A choice made over and over, to keep showing up, to keep breathing, to keep believing in a future where the past no longer controls you. Chapter 15 leaves us with a powerful truth. Your trauma may be part of your story, but it is not the whole story. And it certainly doesn't have to be the ending. Letting go of the past is not about pretending you were never hurt. It's about choosing to live without chains, to feel again, to love again, and to believe in your right to peace, not someday, but now. Let's move into Part 5, Paths to Recovery, starting with Chapter 16, which is Learning to Inhabit Your Body, Yoga. Trauma disconnects you from your body. It teaches you to be on high alert or totally numb. Your body becomes a battlefield, a place of pain, panic, or shutdown. In this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk gently but powerfully introduces the reader to a path back home. Not through talking, not through analysis, but through the body itself. And one of the most powerful tools for that journey? Yoga. Now, let's be real. For many trauma survivors, the idea of moving your body, paying attention to your breath, or being still can feel terrifying. Trauma often makes people feel like their body is the enemy. But what if, instead of fighting it, you could learn to listen to it again, to treat it as a partner in healing? That's the power of yoga. Not the Instagram version. Not the flashy poses. But the deep, quiet, steady practice of being present in your body, even for just a moment. Dr. van der Kolk began exploring yoga not from some trendy curiosity, but because his patients needed something that worked. He started noticing that talk therapy alone wasn't reaching the trauma stored in the body. People were saying, "I understand what happened, but I still feel broken." So he searched for methods that reconnected people with their physical selves, and he found that yoga offered something truly profound. In trauma, your body gets hijacked. Your heart races, your breathing tightens, your muscles brace for impact, even when there's no threat. The nervous system gets stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. Yoga, when practiced in a trauma-informed way, helps shift those patterns. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for rest, digestion, calm, the part that says you're safe now. And here's the key, it's not about the pose, it's about the awareness. A trauma-sensitive yoga class might look slow, even simple. But it's deep. It encourages choice. Can you notice your breath? Can you feel your feet on the floor? Can you choose whether to lift your arm, or not? It's about creating a safe space where your body is yours again. Van der Kolk shares powerful stories of trauma survivors who found their way back to themselves through yoga. Veterans who hadn't slept through the night in years. Abuse survivors who had spent decades numb to touch and sensation. Through small, patient movements, they began to feel again, and not just pain, but strength, calm, even joy. Research backs this up. Van der Kolk and his colleagues conducted studies that showed significant decreases in PTSD symptoms for those who practiced trauma-informed yoga regularly. In fact, in some cases, yoga worked better than traditional therapy or medication. Why? Because it bypasses the thinking brain and goes straight to the body, where trauma lives. But he's careful to stress, yoga isn't a magic fix. It's a practice. It's something you return to, again and again, as a way of building a new relationship with yourself. And it's not for everyone right away. For some, lying on a mat with eyes closed might be too triggering. That's okay. The goal is never to push, it's to listen, to offer options, to restore a sense of choice and control. What makes yoga so powerful in trauma recovery is that it teaches two essential things. You can be in your body without being overwhelmed. And you have the power to calm yourself. When you've spent years reacting to the world as a threat, this is a revolution. It's not just relaxing, it's rewiring your nervous system. It's laying down new patterns of safety, presence, and peace. Chapter 16 is a gentle invitation. Come back home to your body. Not because it's easy. Not because it will erase the past. But because your healing lives there. In your breath. In your heartbeat. In the quiet strength of feeling what you feel, and knowing, truly knowing, that you are still here. Let's continue this powerful path of healing with Chapter 17, Putting the Pieces Together, Self-Leadership. If trauma fragments you, splits you up into scared pieces, angry pieces, lost pieces, then healing is the art of gathering those pieces, one by one, and becoming whole again. Self-leadership is what happens when all those parts start to trust a deeper part of you, the one that is calm, compassionate, and truly present. In this chapter, Dr. Van der Kolk dives into a revolutionary model of therapy called Internal Family Systems, IFS, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz. The idea behind IFS is something incredibly human. We all have different parts inside of us. There's the part that wants to stay in bed. The part that lashes out. The part that tries to please everyone. And deep inside, there's a core self, a version of you that is grounded, wise, and capable of leading. Trauma disrupts this balance. After trauma, your protective parts take over. You might have a part that becomes a perfectionist to avoid criticism. A part that gets angry to keep people at a distance. A part that shuts down because feeling is too painful. These parts are not the enemy, they are survivors. But when they're in charge, you can feel out of control, confused, or ashamed of your own reactions. What IFS teaches is life-changing. You are not broken. Those parts of you are not bad, they're hurt. And what they need most is compassion, not judgment. Dr. Van der Kolk shows how, in therapy, survivors can begin to talk to their parts, not in a childish way, but with deep curiosity and care. Imagine saying to that inner critic, "Hey, I see you. I know you're trying to protect me, but I've got this now. That moment of connection, that shift from reacting to leading, is where healing begins. He tells stories of patients who came in overwhelmed, fragmented, stuck in loops of shame or fear, and who began to build a relationship with their inner world. Slowly, their parts began to trust them. Slowly, they began to feel a sense of self rising. Not just surviving life, but shaping it. Living it. The chapter emphasizes that self-leadership doesn't mean control. It doesn't mean you'll never feel triggered again. It means that when your inner world lights up, when a scared or angry part takes the wheel, you can pause, breathe, and say, "Okay, I see you. Let's talk." You learn to respond, not just react. This process is deep, emotional, and profoundly human. It helps trauma survivors reclaim something that was taken from them: their sense of agency, their inner safety, their ability to be with themselves without fear. And Dr. van der Kolk makes it clear, self-leadership isn't something only therapists can teach. It's a skill we can all learn, a relationship we can build. Whether through IFS therapy, meditation, journaling, or quiet moments of reflection, we can begin to befriend the parts of us we once rejected. This chapter is about wholeness. It's about the idea that healing doesn't come from erasing your past. It comes from including it, integrating it, and loving yourself through it. And when your parts trust that yourself is in charge, everything changes. You start to feel safe inside. You start to feel free. Chapter 17 is a call to come home, not just to your body, but to your heart, your mind, your many inner voices. It's an invitation to lead with love, with patience, and with the fierce belief that you can be the one to guide your own healing. Now, Chapter 18, the power of community to heal. We began this journey by understanding how trauma breaks the body, shatters the mind, and isolates the soul. Now, in this closing chapter, van der Kolk leads us towards something profoundly human: connection. Because the deepest wounds trauma leaves behind are often not just about what happened, but about who wasn't there for us when it did. Isolation is where trauma thrives. But connection is where recovery begins. Dr. Van der Kolk opens this chapter by showing how trauma often leaves people feeling like outsiders, disconnected from others, from their own bodies, and even from their sense of belonging in the world. For many survivors, even when the danger is long gone, that deep sense of, "I don't belong," lingers like a shadow. But he doesn't stop at the pain. Instead, he shifts the focus to what works. And again, the answer is community. He walks us through examples, from veterans groups and theater workshops, to writing circles, drum circles, and trauma-informed schools. These aren't just feel-good extras. These are spaces where people witness each other, hear each other's stories, and feel less alone. Where trauma survivors aren't treated like problems to be solved, but people to be understood, and celebrated for their strength. One of the most beautiful examples van der Kolk gives is about the power of storytelling. How people who've carried unspeakable pain for years begin to find relief when they share their truth in a safe space, and someone simply listens. No judgment. No advice. Just presence. He also dives into theater as therapy, how acting out scenes in a group allowed trauma survivors to step outside of their pain, to try on different roles, to feel something other than fear. In these moments, healing doesn't feel clinical or forced. It feels alive, human, and even joyful. And it's not just about formal therapy. Van der Kolk stresses that healing lives in relationships, in friendship, in mentorship, in family when it's healthy, and in community spaces where people are seen and valued. Whether it's a yoga class, a veterans support group, or a choir, these spaces matter. Because when people feel like they matter, they start to come back to life. There's also an urgent message in this chapter, one aimed at society itself. Van der Kolk urges us to stop looking at trauma as an individual problem. He calls on schools, prisons, hospitals, and communities to become trauma-informed, to recognize that behind the behavior is often a story of pain. And more importantly, there's a chance to rewrite that story if we offer safety, compassion, and real support. He doesn't sugarcoat it. Healing from trauma is hard. It's slow. But what makes it possible is being witnessed, being held, being surrounded by others who say, "You're not broken. You're not alone. We see you." As the chapter closes, van der Kolk leaves us with one powerful truth: we are built to heal in connection. The body remembers the trauma, yes. But it also remembers joy, safety, and love. And when those memories are restored, when the nervous system can relax in the presence of others, something incredible happens. You begin to feel human again. You begin to feel whole. Let's step into Chapter 19, Rewiring the Brain, Neurofeedback. By this point in the journey, we've learned how trauma reshapes the brain, hijacks the body, and disrupts everything from memory to relationships. But in this chapter, Dr. van der Kolk brings us to a revolutionary tool that doesn't just manage symptoms. It actually helps rebuild the brain from the inside out. That tool is called neurofeedback. Imagine if your brain could learn how to calm itself by watching itself in real time. That's the magic behind neurofeedback. It's a method that gives the brain a mirror, not a metaphorical one, but a literal, visual reflection of what it's doing, and teaches it how to self-correct. And the wild part? It's non-invasive. No medication. No surgeries. Just gentle, real-time feedback that gradually helps your brain find balance again. Van der Kolk explains that when trauma hits, the brain loses flexibility. It gets stuck in high-alert survival mode. The amygdala goes into overdrive, the prefrontal cortex shuts down, and the nervous system runs hot, even when there's no danger. This is why trauma survivors often feel hijacked by anxiety, depression, rage, or numbness, even years later. Their brains aren't malfunctioning, they're stuck in a pattern meant for survival. Neurofeedback changes that. Dr. van der Kolk describes the process like this. Electrodes are placed on the scalp, and the brain's electrical activity is measured. Then, through visual cues, like a video game or moving image, the brain receives real-time feedback on how it's functioning. When it enters a calmer or more focused state, the image responds positively. Over time, the brain learns to shift into healthier patterns on its own. It's kind of like going to the gym, but for your brain waves. And the results? Incredibly promising. Van der Kolk shares stories of children with developmental trauma who found focus and peace for the first time. Of adults who, after years of talk therapy, found a new level of calm and control they never thought possible. People started sleeping again, thinking clearly, feeling present. But he also makes an important point: neurofeedback isn't magic. It's not a quick fix. It's a tool, a powerful one, that works best when it's combined with a supportive environment, strong relationships, and other healing practices. It's part of a bigger picture, one that respects both the science of the brain and the depth of the human spirit. What makes this chapter so compelling is that it paints a picture of real hope, not vague optimism, but data-backed, patient-tested hope. For many trauma survivors who feel like they've tried everything, neurofeedback opens a door they didn't know existed. A door that leads not just to feeling less bad, but to actually feeling alive again. And deeper still, van der Kolk shows us something profound. The brain is not fixed. It's plastic. It learns. It heals. And when given the right conditions, it can unlearn fear, unlearn chaos, and remember what peace feels like. This is the promise of neurofeedback. Not to erase the past, but to help the brain stop reliving it. To give survivors the chance to live here, now, in their bodies, in their lives, fully present, fully empowered. Let's wrap up this extraordinary journey with Chapter 20, Finding Your Voice, Communal Rhythms and Theater. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk brings us full circle in this final chapter, reminding us that trauma is not just a wound in the mind or body, it's a deep rupture in the ability to connect, express, and take part in life. And if trauma silences people, makes them freeze, disconnect, hide, then healing must bring people back into movement, rhythm, expression, and voice. This chapter is all about reclaiming that lost voice, and it starts in the most surprising place, theater. Van der Kolk introduces us to his work with Trauma Drama, a theater program designed for young people who've been through serious trauma, neglect, abuse, violence, abandonment. These are kids whose nervous systems are constantly on edge, whose bodies are frozen in defense, and who often have no idea how to name what they're feeling. Traditional talk therapy? Not always effective here. Because the trauma they carry isn't in words, it's in the body. But something incredible happens when these kids are invited to move, to act, to play roles, to improvise, to tell stories, even if they're not their own stories. Slowly, they start to feel their feelings again. They start to laugh, cry, stomp, shout. And most importantly, they start to be seen. In theater, no one is invisible. Everyone has a part. And every voice matters. Van der Kolk reflects on how trauma survivors often lose their sense of agency, that feeling that, I have control over my life. Theater gives it back. When you stand on a stage, even a small one, you claim space. You're not hiding. You're embodied, present, and in flow with others. But it's not just theater. This chapter also explores how music, rhythm, and movement, things as simple as drumming together or dancing, can reset the traumatized brain. Why? Because trauma is stored in the body, in patterns of tension and fear. Rhythmic movement helps rewire those patterns. It's no coincidence that cultures across the world have always used rhythm and song for healing. It's ancient wisdom meeting modern neuroscience. Van der Kolk also stresses the importance of play. For children especially, play is not a luxury, it's a biological necessity. It's how they learn to trust, to test limits, to interact, to build resilience. And for adults, rediscovering play is a way to step out of survival mode and back into life. Trauma shuts down the part of the brain that allows for joy, spontaneity, and imagination. Reclaiming those things isn't just therapeutic, it's revolutionary. The deeper message here is that trauma healing isn't always about talking. Sometimes the most profound breakthroughs come from acting, moving, singing, or simply being in sync with others. It's about reconnecting with the body, with your voice, with the community, with a story that you can shape. In the end, this chapter, and the book as a whole, is a call to action. Not just for individuals, but for schools, communities, therapists, and leaders. We need to create spaces where people can be safe and expressive. Where healing isn't just about being quiet and still, but about being loud, alive, and unafraid. Because when people find their voice, they find their power. And that's the heart of it. Trauma silences, but healing gives you back your sound. Your movement. Your place in the rhythm of life. You don't just survive. You belong, you create, and you speak your truth, fully, freely, and without shame. By the time you turn the final page of The Body Keeps the Score, something inside you shifts. Not just because you've learned how trauma rewires the brain, hijacks the body, and changes everything from memory to relationships, but because you've seen something deeper. You've seen that healing isn't only possible. It's real. It's messy. And it's beautiful. What Bessel van der Kolk gives us is a roadmap, yes, grounded in science, research, and decades of experience. But he also gives us hope. Not the empty kind, but the kind you feel when someone finally understands your pain and tells you, you're not broken. You're human. This book reminds us that trauma doesn't live in the past. It lives in the present, in your heartbeat, your breath, your sleep, your muscles, your flashbacks, your silence. It's not just about what happened to you, it's about what's still happening inside you. But the most powerful truth is this: your body can heal. Your brain can learn safety again. Your heart can remember love. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming your voice, your body, your choices, your joy. It's about becoming the author of your own story again, not the prisoner of someone else's actions. Whether it's through EMDR, yoga, neurofeedback, theater, safe relationships, or simply learning to feel your own breath again, healing starts the moment you say, I want my life back. And make no mistake, you deserve it. Van der Kolk shows us that healing doesn't come from fixing what's wrong with you. It comes from creating space for everything you are, your pain, your strength, your fear, your fire. It comes from connection, from compassion, from community. Because trauma is isolating, but healing is relational. So if you're listening to this, and you've been carrying something for too long, let this book be the sign you've been waiting for. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you are definitely not weak. You are a survivor. And there's a whole world of people, therapists, healers, friends, even strangers, who are walking this path too. The Body Keeps the Score isn't just a book. It's a lifeline. And it's an invitation to come back home to your body, your story, and yourself. No matter how long it takes, no matter how broken things feel, you can heal. And that healing, it begins right here, right now, with one small, brave step. If you found this summary insightful and valuable, don't forget to show your support by subscribing to the Mindful Brief on YouTube. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this audiobook summary, share it with your peers, friends, or family who might benefit from it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more in-depth and valuable content for you. Stay tuned for more summaries, insights, and strategies to elevate your knowledge and career. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.